Good afternoon. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, elected officials, community leaders, and fellow advocates for voting rights. I hope that you have enjoyed your complimentary lunch, courtesy of Panera Bread. My name is Karen Nelson, and I am your host of today's event. Welcome to our main program for the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, a landmark piece of legislation that transformed our democracy and continues to shape the fight for equal representation today. But wait, there's more. State President Gene Roberts of the Appleton Fox Cities League, who will introduce Larry Littlegeorge to bring us a land acknowledgement as a proud tribal member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. Jeannie, Larry.
Taller than me. With the gutting of the Voting Rights Act and increase in voter suppression tactics, Indigenous communities in the United States face significant barriers to exercising their right to vote. Some of the key barriers include geographic isolation, limited mail service and non-traditional addresses, strict voter ID laws that disproportionately impact Indigenous voters, lack of funding for voter registration and education, sufficient polling sites and ballot drop boxes, along with ballot restrictions regarding who can collect and return ballots, even when polls and ballot boxes are far away. These barriers result in significantly lower voter turnout on tribal lands compared to other areas. The League of Women Voters considers itself as an ally in working to lower disenfranchisement of Indigenous peoples and communities and supports providing accessible election services on reservations, accepting tribal IDs and alternative forms of address verification for voter registration and voting, expanding mail-in and early voting options with consideration for the specific challenges faced by Indigenous communities, investing in voter education and assistance programs tailored to Indigenous communities, and restoring federal protections like those provided by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It is my honor to introduce Larry Littlegeorge, who is a Ho-Chunk tribal member of the Warrior Clan and serves as president of the Alliance for Justice, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to educating the public about the lasting impacts of the doctrine of discovery. Through the organization's signature program, the Blanket Exercise, Larry helps condense over 500 years of colonial history into a powerful, interactive 90-minute presentation. In his role, Larry also works to preserve Indigenous culture and uphold traditional rights by raising awareness of the historical treaties and legal foundations that continue to shape the lives of Native peoples today. His leadership reflects a deep commitment to justice, education, and cultural preservation. Please welcome Larry Littlegeorge.
A little taller. I want to thank all of the ones that were present that asked me to come to do a land acknowledgement. And there's a lot of things that we have to go ahead and to address, especially with the times that we are in. I myself, we have a little bit of legislation that we're working on, and it's a bill probably you'll be hearing about soon, and hopefully your support. And hopefully your support. So here's the what I have for a land acknowledgement. Our path has always been free to walk. We stand today in the heart of what is and has always been the ancestral homeland of my people, the Ho-Chunk Nation, also known as the people of the sacred voice. Long before this place was called Madison, before the state of Wisconsin was imagined or mapped, our people thrived on these lands, in these waters, and under these skies. Our oral history and memories tell us we came from Mogashuch. Mogashuch is Red Banks in our language, and it's just above Green Bay. And from that sacred place, our homeland extended westward towards the Twin Cities and south along the Great Lakes to Chicago. And from Chicago, it went south to what now is St. Louis. We shared lands west of the Mississippi with our relatives. All this, what we now call Wisconsin, was once held together by the breath, by the footsteps, by the languages, and the governance of the Ho-Chunk people. This was not empty land. This was a living nation of people. Over by Mogashuch, Green Bay, there is a lake, Lake Winnebago, 33 miles long, 100 miles around it. It was once said it took 2 days to walk through our village. Our homes, our houses, which we call chipoteques, stood 4 deep around the shorelines of this lake. And our people living around this lake numbered nearly 920,000. Can you imagine the scale and the vibrance of our nation before colonization and before forced removals? We have been here not just for generations, but since before the glaciers receded, through 2 ice ages. This is not a metaphor. This is truth. We are still here, and our path has always been free to walk. Today, the Ho-Chunk Nation's land base is scattered across 14 counties in Wisconsin here. We now share this place with 11 other federal recognized tribes and 1 state recognized tribe, the Brothertown Nation. We and our relatives hold an unbroken tie to this soil, these waters, and the spirit of this place. When we speak of the land, we do not speak of it only as geography. We speak of it as a memory, as ancestor, and as kin. This ground holds our songs, our stories, our treaties, and our resilience. We acknowledge that the very seat of government in this state, this Capitol building, sits on Ho-Chunk land. This is not a fact of history. It is a living reality. We do not speak these truths to assign guilt. We speak them to affirm presence, to assert sovereignty, and to remind all who walk here, this is native land, and it always has been. We are still here, and our path is still and always free to walk. I want to thank you.
Thank you so much. That just brought me to tears. So beautiful. Let us just pause here for a moment of silence in honor of our ancestors. Thank you. Now, I am pleased to present and let you know that we are honored to be joined by distinguished elected officials who carry forward, we're in Wisconsin, forward the legacy of voting rights protection in our state. Governor Tony Evers, who invited us into this space, calls this place the People's House. That's why we're here. Governor Evers and Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez send their regrets for being unable to join us in person. But wait, they sent the next best thing. What could that be? This beautiful statewide proclamation. And here to present it to all of us is my dear friend, Secretary of State, Sarah Godlewski.
Well, hello, Wisconsin, and happy 60th voting rights anniversary. Before I present the proclamation, I would love for us to give a round of applause to your incredible co-chairs, Karen Nelson and Ernestine Moss. Ernestine, if you can also stand, for bringing us all together today. Thank you both, because we know how important this voting rights legislation changed our country for the better in breaking down discriminatory barriers that for so long were keeping Black Americans and people of color away from the voting box. And here in Wisconsin, we also know the power of our vote, because we are a battleground state. We only win elections by a few votes per ward or by precinct. We have one of the highest voting turnout states in the entire country. And we were the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment, allowing women the right to vote in this country. But I want to be clear that that's why it's a reminder that progress is possible in the voting rights space, but it's not guaranteed. And we are even seeing today, in 2025, 60 years later, people attacking, legislators, elected officials attacking our right to vote, our ability to access the ballot. So look, today is a reminder that it's not just a celebration, it's a call to action. It's a call to action to demand better so we can ensure access for everyone when it comes to the ballot box here in Wisconsin. So again, thank you for the work that you are doing, coming here, talking to your legislators, elevating today's important milestone with celebrating the voting rights 60th anniversary. And with that, I'd like to just highlight a few things from the governor, since he cannot be here today. But he says, whereas on August 6th, President Lyndon Johnson was joined by civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, to sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law. And while the 15th Amendment was ratified 95 years prior and made it unconstitutional for any man to be denied the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude, widespread voter disenfranchisement efforts on parts of states and local governments were going on against people of color and were historically opposed communities against Black Americans. Whereas the law's numerous landmark provisions prohibited things such as poll taxes, literacy tests, which had served as a major tool of voter suppression. And the immediate effects of the Voter Rights Acts of 1965 included a significant rise in voter turnout across the United States. And by the end of that year alone, 250,000 Black voters had been registered, according to the National Archives. And whereas despite the progress that was achieved over the past 6 decades, voting rights continue to face challenges, making it essential to remain vigilant in protecting and preserving these hard-won freedoms for current and future generations. And as Wisconsinites, we are reminded of the importance of holding free and fair elections that allow for all eligible voters across the state and country to have a say in easy and equitable access to the ballot box. So, therefore, Tony Evers, Governor of Wisconsin, hereby proclaims the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So thank you all.
And Secretary Godlewski is so humble. What she left out, guess who is the second signature on here? Sarah Godlewski, Secretary of State. I will now present this to my Executive Director for Safekeeping in the State Office. Deborah Cronmiller. Thank you, Secretary Godlewski. Your dedication to fair, secure, and accessible elections. I've seen you in the hood, in the country club. I've seen you everywhere fighting for our rights, upholding the very principles that the Voting Rights Act stands for and is designed to protect. So I just wanted to publicly take an additional moment to say thank you for your service and your presence here today. We also have received greetings from Senator Tammy Baldwin, U.S. Congresswoman Gwen Moore and her son, State Representative Supreme Moore Adacunde, State Representative Sheila Stubbs, whose staff is in the back there, Grace Johnson helped put this together with me, State Senator Dora Drake and her staff assistants. Oh, Senator Drake is here. Thank you. And her staff support in Nicholas Truog. Also, my Milwaukee alderperson, who I go to church with, saw me Sunday, Charlene Moore, and sends her regrets as well, but appreciates the invitation and wishes us great success today. If there are any other elected officials present, please stand at this time so we may acknowledge you. Seeing none, I will continue. I have been tasked with to provide a brief history of the Voting Rights Act in the state of Wisconsin. Do you know that people have been voting in the state of Wisconsin since 1820? Of course, not every Wisconsin resident was allowed to vote or hold that office since then, however. The first known vote in the state of Wisconsin occurred in 1825 in Green Bay. After Wisconsin became a territory in 1836, guess what? Every, say it with me now, white male citizen of the United States above the age of 21 who lived in the territory was entitled to vote, and if elected, could even hold office. All townships and county offices, except judicial offices, justices of the peace, sheriffs, and clerks were elected. The first act of the Legislative Assembly of 1838 was to provide for more regulated general elections. The law provided that a voter must be free, white, male, or even a foreigner, as long as they were duly naturalized, and must have had 6 months of residence in the territory called Wisconsin. In 1846, when Wisconsin was preparing to become a state, the legislature changed the voting rules. They enacted that every white male citizen above the age of 21 who'd lived in the territory at least 6 months and who was either a citizen of the United States or had declared his, no her, intention to become one was authorized to vote. Political leaders then included a provision in 1846 that would have allowed African Americans to vote in 1846. But that was too radical, even for Wisconsin, sometimes known as a radical state, right? An idea whose time was rejected by the voters, all of them white by definition, because that's all who could vote. It was not until 1866 when Ezekiel Gillespie, a leader in Milwaukee's black community, sued the state of Wisconsin for the right to vote and carried his case to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Yeah, right behind you, right up those stairs. And found that the court unanimously voted in favor of black suffrage for the first time in this state, and found that African Americans in the state had actually been entitled to vote, guess what, since 1849. We have flyers on this information brought to us by Eloisa Gomez, who was with Mayor Cavalier Johnson in the city of Milwaukee, along with my other Milwaukee League sisters, for their own local Milwaukee declaration for the state celebrating Ezekiel Gillespie. If you'd like to learn more, write that down, Google him. Now, our state has had a proud tradition of progressive politics and civil rights advocacy, right? But while the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was born with the courage of activists in Selma, Alabama, and across the South, we are proud of the following. The first to ratify, you've already heard. We were also the first state to enact unemployment compensation law, the first to celebrate gay pride by flying an inclusion rainbow flag on this very state capitol's flagpole, the first to elect an openly gay official, and Wisconsin has just elected the second Supreme Court justice, just sworn in last week, in a row who supports reproductive freedoms and fair maps. Along with all of those firsts, let's face it, we're a purple state, y'all. So we have also faced challenges in ensuring equal access to the ballot box, from debates over voter ID, laws to discussions about early voting and registration procedures. Our state has been in the center of national conversations about how we balance election security and voter access. So as Secretary Godlewski said, this event is both a celebration and a call to action, aligning with our ongoing work to ensure every voice is heard, every vote is counted. Thank you all for being here. And now let's take a look back at those whose shoulders we stand on today.
Hello there. I'm Selena Stewart, CEO of the League of Women Voters of the United States, and here to talk to you about the state of democracy in America. Over the last few years, we've learned a lot about our democracy, right? We've learned about our collective power, particularly how precious it is, how vulnerable it can be, and what it can withstand when threatened or attacked. At the League, we have long said that democracy is the living, breathing, and evolving system that we must nurture. Democracy doesn't happen only in Washington, D.C., from where I speak today. It happens each and every time an individual registers to vote and cast a ballot. And it's not just the presidential elections either, but also these local contests where the outcomes may hit a little closer to home. That's election of local commissioners, school boards, even your city councils. Democracy happens when we speak up. Speaking up can take many forms, including starting or signing petitions, addressing something in your community, or what is happening in Congress or not happening. I invite you to visit the League site at www.lwv.org and learn how you can help by volunteering, donating money to help us fight to protect democracy, and helping us spread accurate information around the country. Become an engaged citizen or an active leader in your local league chapter, or start one if nothing exists currently. Or you can simply volunteer at an event or on a committee. You can take the first step and see what transformative opportunities follow. One day, perhaps not too long from now, we'll all look back and ask ourselves if we adequately met this moment, if we nurtured our democracy when it mattered the most, if we paid attention, took a stand for what we believed in, and got involved in meaningful ways. We don't want to be the weakest link in the legacy of overcomers. Let's get to work. Thank you.
Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did and it never will. Frederick Douglass, 1849. August 28, 1967. Over 100 members of the NAACP Youth Council and Commandos, led by Father James Grappy, march on Milwaukee for open housing.
We have tried every means possible to bring fair housing legislation to the city of Milwaukee. And we're going to continue to march. It's up to the government of this city and of this state to see to it that we can exercise our constitutional right of freedom of speech. And we're going to exercise that, regardless of what the danger. We'll die for that right. We are going to march again on the south side this evening. We're going to begin here at the Freedom House at 6 o'clock. And we're going to take the same route that we took last night. We're going to cross the Mason-Dixon line. That's the 16th Street Viaduct, down to Lincoln Avenue, and again to Kosciuszko Park. And if anyone gets hurt in that line, and
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
I didn't expect this to myself, because I thought that Milwaukee was a nice city, because we like it here.
Like it here.
And
we'd all greet you in love
and yeah, and all that jive, man. Let me tell you something.
Chris Seraphin
The South Side. Seraphin live on the South Side.
Well, no. Seraphin said that this is not. He said this is not Selma, Alabama. We have fine racial relations here.
On the night of August 29th, the marchers returned to find their Freedom House in flames.
Police said there was a sniper. There was no sniper in there. They were shooting those guns off all over the place, up in the air around here, and where they got the idea there was a sniper, I don't know.
They always
Where's that tear gas bomb?
there it is, right
Look at
there.
this. Now see, this is what was taken out of the house. That's a tear gas bomb. You see
Out
that?
of the house. This the one
Out of the house.
when I told everybody to move out.
And this is some of the
That's the one
shotgun
they
shells they were shooting off. We have a strategy meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I don't know what decision the commandos are going to make as far as future action is concerned. We are very concerned about the attitude and the conduct of the mayor of the city of Milwaukee. Everyone built him up as such a great hero when there was this little disturbance on 3rd Street because he called in the National Guard immediately and put the entire city under a curfew. Well, for heaven's sake, we have a right to exercise our constitutional God-given right of free speech. That means protest, demonstration, whenever we want. This is our constitutional right, and we have a right to get adequate and decent protection. That's what we can. That's a double standard of justice.
Yeah, he called us hoodlums. What the hell do we call them out there throwing bricks and bottles at little kids?
Well, Father, has your marches to the South Side accomplished anything so far for fair housing?
We're going to get fair housing, not only for the city of Milwaukee, but we're going to get it on a national scene. And it's going to be this consistent type of courageous protest that's going to bring about fair housing legislation. Frederick Douglass talked about this 100 years ago. He said, no one ever got their rights given to them on a platter. You've got to fight for it, you've got to struggle for it, and that's what we're doing. We're protesting. And we're going to keep agitating, we're going to keep protesting until we get what is ours.
Her legacy, I believe, is of a woman who stood for all the people and in all circumstances.
It's a great day for Wisconsin. It's a great day for our nation. We're doing something today that it's never been done.
My mom used to say that she felt more difficulty being a woman than she did being black.
My mother was about bringing people together. She liked people. She cheered for people. She listened to them. So I'm quite proud of the piece that we have here.
The Honorable Val Phillips will become the first woman in this nation to have a singular sculpture on state capitol grounds because of them.
3, 2, 1. The Honorable Val R. Phillips.
This isn't about Jesus Salas. This is about a farm workers movement, and what comes out of there is the issues of the community, its roots, and its legacy. We were part of 100,000 seasonal migrant workers coming from La Frontera, from the Texas-Mexico borderlands, coming up here, and we converted the agricultural industry of this region to feed all of these growing urban areas that were growing at the time. Wisconsin at that time became a leader.
You can't tell the story of Wisconsin without telling the story of Texas Mexicans and of migrant farm workers.
Only 375 camps were certified for human inhabitation. 50 of them were provisional, and nearly 100 of them were uncertified. There were no potable water in them. There were no bathrooms or toilets.
Conditions were terrible in those days, and in some cases, they're still the same.
The question of social movements are intrinsically questions of solidarity, right? How do we come across divisions of difference and try to better understand a world in which we can all thrive together?
And somebody shows me, said, hey, this is a newspaper in LA. You see what the farm workers are doing in California? And I said, that's what we need to do.
People like Jesus Salas and Salvador Sanchez advocated for changes and establishing laws to protect farm workers.
The Milwaukee Journal, the paper for which you work, did an article on me and called me Milwaukee's angriest young Negro. Sometimes today people may refer to me the same way, all right? So what was my memories of marching across that bridge the first time? It was a memory of anger, of thinking that my brother, and I had two in service, I had one in the Army and one in the Air Force, that both my brothers were in service of this country during a period of war, and that I could not even march across the 16th Street Viaduct without breaking out a white riot. What were my brothers fighting for? Who were my brothers fighting for? Now later on, I would receive a letter of induction. And so my choices were either to go down and be inducted, which I didn't see any sense in doing, or to appear in court for fighting for my rights as an African American in this city. So I decided to appear in front of Judge Servant. And so for the first time in my life, and I'm a young teenager, I am now standing up to the Milwaukee Police Department, to the brutality that they've put out, to the white racists who want me and my brothers to go and die for this country, but who won't allow us to move outside of restricted areas. And so that's my mindset. For the first time, you now can stand up as a man. That's been my energy from that point to this point in my life. It's important to me that we stand up and be counted.
Hey everybody, it's Carrie. So I know a lot of us are feeling it right now, right? The frustration and the exhaustion, and it's really easy to wonder if any of this work still matters when so much feels broken. But as we come up on 60 years since the Voting Rights Act, I keep thinking about the folks who came before us because they were frustrated and they were tired. And they were also up against a system that did not want them to be heard, but they did not give up. They organized, they marched, they voted, and they were able to change the course of history and really make life so much better for so many of us. And I know it's like, here we are again, right? Fighting to be seen and heard and fighting to exist. But I think we have to remember their legacy and use it as our guiding light because voting matters. And in Wisconsin, voting is always around the corner and the rest of the country is always watching. Every election is a chance to move us closer to the democracy that we deserve. So yes, we can be tired, we can be frustrated, but we cannot sit it out because our voices still matter, and now more than ever. I vote because I believe in my power, and I believe in your power to shape what comes next for our families and for our communities and for our future. So, we vote. We vote to honor the 60th anniversary, and we vote to honor the future that we deserve.
Hey, this is Attorney General Eric Holder. You know, in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. This is the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. And to this day, it remains the most powerful law we've ever had that protects the right to vote. Yet 60 years later, we are far from the promise of a truly representative democracy where every person has equal power at the ballot box. Not only that, but efforts to suppress voters and silence communities of color are still ongoing. Now, because no other law offers the same level of protection as the Voting Rights Act, it continues to be threatened by opponents of democracy. Now, I know some of you might be feeling tired and disenchanted with everything going on, and you want to push away from the madness. But like generations before, we cannot afford to disengage. Anti-democracy forces are showing no signs of letting up. We need to keep fighting. We must continue to make our voices heard at the ballot box, to honor the legacy of those who fought before us, and to keep building for the generations who will come after us. And here's the deal. Here's the deal. If we fight, we will win. That won't be easy. We won't be successful all the time. But if we stay committed, we will be victorious.
But at this time, I'm going to bring forth to the podium the Executive Director for the state of Wisconsin, Deborah Cron-Miller, who will then present and introduce our keynote speaker, Diana Nguyen, the National President of the League of Women Voters, U.S.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for sharing this wonderful celebration of the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act and the 50th anniversary of Section 203. As the Executive Director for the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, it's my great pleasure to welcome our National Board President to Wisconsin and to the podium. Diana Nguyen was elected President of the League of Women Voters of the United States in 2024. Diana was originally elected to the U.S. Board in 2022 and served as its Vice President and on the Governance Committee, the Transformation Team, and the Executive Committee. Prior to joining the LWV-US board, Diana was the president of the League of Women Voters of Wake County in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she previously served as communications director and chaired the strategic planning, diversity, equity, and inclusion, redistricting, and 100th anniversary committees. She has been a guest speaker on many issues near and dear to the League, has been interviewed by countless media outlets, and has presented statements before numerous government entities. Diana is a past president of the ACLU of North Carolina, where she served on the board for several years. Her work with the League and the ACLU reflects her dedication to using a nonpartisan approach when advocating on important issues. Diana has over 35 years of experience delivering training to businesses, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and adult learners. She has helped clients develop a strategic approach to group decisions and provided training in essential communication skills, including group dynamics, leadership, listening, conflict management, verbal and nonverbal effectiveness, group problem solving, and advocacy skills. Diana also has almost a decade of experience as a trial consultant working with attorney clients in jurisdictions nationwide to develop courtroom communication strategies in preparation for complex civil litigation matters. She was full-time faculty at Nash Community College in North Carolina, Midland, Texas, and Prince George's Community College in Maryland. She is the co-author of several college textbooks, including Working in Groups, Think Communication, and The Challenge of Communicating. Diana has an MS in Communication with a minor in Political Science from the University of North Texas, a BA in Speech Communication from California State University, Fullerton, and an AA in Administration of Justice from Cerritos College in California. Born in Arizona and raised in Texas and California, Diana currently lives in Cary, North Carolina. In her spare time, and it looks like she has very little of that, she is an avid reader and enjoys visiting museums and art galleries with her husband. Diana previously served on the board of directors for ArtSpace, a nonprofit arts organization in downtown Raleigh dedicated to inspiring positive community impact through art, such as the beautiful art we are surrounded by here by Nikki Johnson. It is my pleasure to give you Diana Wynn.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you today in the beautiful state of Wisconsin. Last month, I had a chance to be in Rochester, New York. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to tour the home of Susan B. Anthony and then visit the gravesite of Frederick Douglass. You know, Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass were very close friends. Both were abolitionists and suffragists. But it was a poignant reminder to me that the fight for equality and the work to secure voting rights has been long and hard fought. While the Civil War ended in 1865, the 15th Amendment recognizing black men's right to vote was not enacted until 1870. But we all know that after the Reconstruction era, voter suppression laws and intimidation tactics restricted the voting rights of black men well into the 20th century. And as many of you know, the League of Women Voters was founded in 1920 by suffragists after fighting for the right to vote for 72 years. The same year, that was the same year that the 19th Amendment was passed recognizing a woman's right to vote. But the reality is that the 19th Amendment primarily benefited white women. Most women of color did not truly gain access to the ballot in 1920, again, as a result of voter suppression laws. And you all know resistance in many states to extend voting protections to people of color was strong, and it was sometimes violent. But I will also tell you that that level of opposition is also a recognition of the power of voting. It wasn't until 60 years ago in 1965, with the passage of the Voting Rights Act, that the promise of both the 15th and 19th Amendments began to be fulfilled. So today, I'd like to talk about the fight for voting rights, how the Voting Rights Act has advanced democracy, but also how the Voting Rights Act has been weakened, and what we need to do to better protect voting rights today. Before I talk specifically about the Voting Rights Act, I think it's important to acknowledge what happened in Selma, Alabama, a few months earlier in 1965. And I begin the story with Mr. Jimmy Lee Jackson. Jimmy Lee Jackson, along with his mother and his grandfather, had tried for several years to register to vote without success. And then in February of 1965, Jimmy Lee Jackson, his sister, his 82-year-old grandfather, and his mother, Viola Jackson, were peacefully participating in a march in their hometown of Marion, Alabama, when state troopers became violent. The family ran, and they took cover in a local cafe. But they were pursued by those state troopers, and the troopers began to brutally beat Jimmy Lee and his mother. And when he tried to protect his mother, the unarmed Jimmy Lee Jackson was fatally shot. His death and his mother's grief sparked outrage, but it also sparked resolve among civil rights activists. During the memorial service, Dr. King said, "Jimmy Lee Jackson's death says to us that we must work passionately and unrelentingly to make the American dream a reality. His death must prove that unmerited suffering does not go unredeemed." And to channel that anger and that grief over Jimmy Lee's death toward a more positive outcome, civil rights activists organized a series of 3 marches for voting rights in Selma, Alabama. The first march took place on March 7th with about 600 peaceful protesters. But when they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, state troopers attacked them. Amelia Boynton was beaten unconscious. A photo of her limp body on the bridge appeared in newspapers throughout the world. A young John Lewis, chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee at 25 years old, he suffered a fractured skull. Almost 60 marchers were injured, including 17 that had to be hospitalized, and that day became known as Bloody Sunday. The second march, called Turnaround Tuesday, took place a couple days later, and it included 2,500 marchers who walked onto the bridge to be led in prayer by Dr. King before turning around and not actually crossing the bridge due to a court order. But that same night, white supremacists murdered civil rights activist James Reeb, a Unitarian Universalist minister. The murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson had inspired him to travel all the way from Boston to attend the march. And Reeb's murder sparked further national outcry. So on March 15th, President Lyndon Johnson, during a nationally televised joint session of Congress, introduced what would become the Voting Rights Act, and he urged lawmakers to pass it. And a few days after that, the third march, the march from Selma to Montgomery, began on March 21st with protesters escorted by the National Guard, the FBI, and federal marshals because, of course, state law enforcement would not protect these peaceful protesters. It included thousands of marchers walking many miles a day for 4 days until they reached Montgomery, Alabama on March 24th. And the following day, 25,000 people gathered on the steps of the state capitol. And this third march received national and international media attention. I will also note, sadly, that night, another civil rights activist who had traveled from Detroit to participate in the march was murdered by the KKK. Speaking from the steps of the Alabama State Capitol that day, Dr. King said, "I know you are asking today, how long will it take? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long." And the efforts of these courageous activists were not in vain. Several months later, the Voting Rights Act was passed by a bipartisan vote in Congress, and President Johnson signed it into law on August 6, 1965, during a ceremony that included Dr. King, Rosa Parks, and the young civil rights leader who had been injured in Selma, Alabama, John Lewis. And when signing the act into law, President Johnson said, "It is wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country. There is no issue of states' rights or national rights. There is only the struggle for human rights." So as we talk about the Voting Rights Act today, it's important to understand the arduousness and danger of the struggle for voting rights. And remember that many risked their lives for their own right or for the rights of others to simply cast a ballot. This year marks 60 years since the passing of the Voting Rights Act, and it was a landmark piece of legislation that transformed American democracy. And while I began my story with the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, the act was passed after decades of work by civil rights leaders, brave activists, and ordinary people like you and me speaking up. And while the events in Selma were directly related to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, let's not overlook the fact that Alabama wasn't the only problem. Black voting rights were being suppressed in states and in communities across this nation. The Voting Rights Act is considered by many to be the most effective piece of civil rights legislation ever enacted in this country. Since 1965, it's been amended and reauthorized by Congress 5 times with bipartisan support. Now, I'm not an attorney or a constitutional scholar, but I do want to share some key things that this legislation accomplished. It generally prohibited voter suppression tactics designed to disenfranchise voters. For example, no longer could a state require a literacy test, some of which included questions like the completely irrelevant, does enumeration affect the income tax levied on citizens in various states? I have no idea. or the nonsensical instruction on one literacy test to, quote, print backwards, forwards. These tests were designed for people to fail and keep them from the ballot box. In certain jurisdictions that had a history of intimidating people of color at the polls, the act required federal election examiners to register voters and to monitor elections. And importantly, the Voting Rights Act required that certain jurisdictions with a history of voter suppression obtain pre-clearance from the U.S. Department of Justice before a change could be made to any voting rules in those particular states. And over time, many provisions of the Act were expanded to cover all states. And as you heard earlier, beginning in 1975, the Voting Rights Act required that certain jurisdictions provide language assistance in communities with voters who are not proficient in English. And the Voting Rights Act provided a clearer path for individuals and groups to file lawsuits against measures that suppressed voting. For example, a number of years ago here in Wisconsin, provisions of the act were used to fight back against voter ID laws. And of course, as you all know, that effort was ultimately not successful. Some have called the Voting Rights Act the single largest gain in the movement for representative democracy, and it had an immediate impact. By the end of 1965, 250,000 new black voters had been registered, 1/3 of them by those federal examiners that the Voting Rights Act required. And research has shown that over time, the act has successfully increased voter turnout and voter registration, especially among black Americans. And the act is credited for significantly increasing the number of people of color holding elected office. The Voting Rights Act has been tested in over 20 U.S. Supreme Court cases, and it held up really well for many, many decades until more recent years. In 2013, in the case of Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision that effectively gutted key components of the Voting Rights Act. And in particular, the court's decision undermined those pre-clearance requirements, essentially making them unenforceable. And since the court's decision, a number of states that would have been included under those original pre-clearance provisions, they've changed their voting policies, and not always in ways that improve access to the ballot box, such as changes related to early voting, souls to the polls Sunday voting, voter ID requirements, and voter roll purges. 5 years after the ruling, nearly 1,000 polling places had closed, many of them in predominantly black counties. A 2020 study found that in many jurisdictions which had previously been covered by those pre-clearance provisions, that there has been a significant increase in the rate of voter registration purges after that Supreme Court decision. And a 2018 report by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights found an increase in laws that made it harder to vote, especially for minority populations. The commission chair said, and I quote, "People continue to suffer significant and profoundly unequal limitations on their ability to vote, and that stark reality denigrates our democracy and diminishes our ideals." And in her dissenting opinion, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote, "Voting discrimination still exists. No one doubts that. But the court today terminates the remedy that proved to be the best suited to block that discrimination." And the League of Women Voters agrees with the late Justice Ginsburg, and I'm proud that the League of Women Voters joined an important amicus brief at that time in that case in support of the Voting Rights Act. I will also add that in 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court again weakened the Voting Rights Act in another decision that now makes it more difficult to challenge discriminatory voting laws in the courts. Quite frankly, all this damage done by those Supreme Court decisions also serves as a testament to the importance of the Voting Rights Act in the first place. But Congress has the power to correct the gaps that were created by those Supreme Court decisions. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act represents our best defense against voter suppression practices. This bill aims to rectify the disastrous Supreme Court decisions by modernizing and strengthening the Voting Rights Act. And here are just a few of the things that this legislation would do. It would provide an updated understanding of voter suppression tactics, including rules related to redistricting, voting qualifications, documentation, and the location and number of polling places. In jurisdictions with a diverse population, it would reestablish federal review and approval before state election laws are changed. It would restore the ability to bring lawsuits challenging racially discriminatory practices, and it would increase transparency, ensuring that the voters are actually made aware of any changes in their voting rules. But to date, Congress has failed. They have failed to pass this important legislation. The late great Congressman and civil rights leader John Lewis, he once said, "The vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It's the most powerful nonviolent tool we have in a democracy." And Lewis was right. If voting didn't matter, those in power wouldn't work so hard to take it away or unfairly restrict it. So we will continue to push for voting rights protections and fight back against voter suppression tactics. We must ensure that every voter, regardless of where they live or what they look like, has access to the ballot. So I ask you to continue to call on Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We must make the connection between the civil rights movement and the moment that we find ourselves in today. Our nation was made more whole due to the efforts and sacrifices of so many civil rights activists. Our charge today is to preserve their legacy and work toward a more just and equitable America. Earlier this year, I had the honor of attending the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. And I marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and I can tell you it was a truly moving experience. But it was a reminder of the bravery of the movement that culminated in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. With the Voting Rights Act, generations of would-be voters finally achieved the promise of the 15th and 19th Amendments, the right to participate in our democracy, to simply register to vote and cast a ballot, an act that is simple but so very powerful. Today, as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, one of the most consequential pieces of legislation in our democracy, let us not forget those who fought for voting rights for people of color including Ida B. Wells Barnett, Frederick Douglass, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and so many more. And let us not forget Jimmy Lee Jackson, whose death inspired the marches in Selma. But in honoring them, let us draw inspiration and learn from their legacies as we continue to move forward to ensure that, in the words of President Abraham Lincoln, our democracy is of the people, by the people, for the people, and I would add, all the people. Thank you for including me today in celebration of this landmark legislation.
This brings us to the close of our program. My co-chair, Ernestine Moss, has some closing remarks.
Thank you all for coming. I want to thank our expert speakers, President Nguyen. There's so much I would love to say about each of the dynamic speakers that you've heard here today. And let us give them all a round of applause, please. Including our magnificent host, Karen Nelson. And in the interest of time, we want to make sure that you know that we really, really appreciate your presence, your support, and all of that. And I just ask you to look on the back of your program to see our support, our financial supporters. Each and every one of them is important to us, and we want you to just take note. And thank you, thank you.